It's all right. It was probably a piece of shit anyway.
I don't care. I was right.
Hello there, friends, and welcome to the Paranatural Podcast. My name is Ben.
And I'm Eric Cartman.
Oh my god, that was fucking phenomenal. Oh my god, I can't even think anymore. That was fucking awesome.
Thanks.
Oh man. Well, let me get back on track here. Me and Eric are very glad to have you with us tonight as we get to the third and final installment of the Satan's Harvest series.
Thank God.
Well, Mr. Cartman, how the hell are you doing tonight, buddy?
Doing pretty good. I'm sick, but I'll be okay. How are you?
Doing good.
Good.
Doing fucking phenomenal.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Good. So, yeah, I'm super glad this is the last part.
You know, it's been a ride. It's a good story,
I miss my funny shit.
but it's been a ride.
Yeah.
So, since this is the end of the ride, I think we'll get pretty much right to it. So all I'll say is if you enjoy our show, don't forget to leave us that 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And when we get to 50, we're going to have a little live Facebook Live or something type of meet and greet chit chat thing.
Yeah.
And
I'm excited for that.
Whether you can or can't do that and you enjoy our show, don't forget to share it with a friend. Tell people about us. We really appreciate it. Helps
Donate
us
all your money. You know.
Yeah, we do have a Patreon. Patreon.com/Paranatural Podcast, where you get extra content and us just fucking around some more on the internet. So,
And an OnlyFans.
we don't have an only. I don't know what you're doing.
No, we do. It's like ceiling fans,
Oscillating fans.
the old-fashioned Chinese fans. If you're into the Oriental
I
stuff.
still swear to God I'm going to do that one of these days. Anyway, that's all I got. Jacob, take it away.
Okay. So last week was pretty rough. This week is going to be pretty rough. So if that doesn't meet your fancies, if you don't want to hear about like real bloody shit and contorting and whatnot, tune in next week. The funny stuff will resume. And with that being said, little recap on last week. Maurice's mama, she became very good friends with a bullet. Philip, he stayed a dick until the very end and then shot himself after shooting Alice. Whether or not that was Philip or a demon, who's to say? And then shit only got worse for our little Frenchie. He had missing time, automotive anomalies, the old doppelgangers, even stigmata, and much more strange things. So this week, we're going to begin with a simple walk through town after their move to near Warren, Massachusetts. Maurice and Nancy were walking through town when suddenly Maurice got very lightheaded and dizzy. Nancy rushed to his side, and in a deep, strange voice, he said, "Your father doesn't have long to live." And then he passed out. When he woke up, Nancy was like, "Hey, you were saying some very scary things about my dad. Why?" And he had no knowledge of any of that. Nancy, she wasn't taking the chance. She called her dad right away. Her dad was fine. Everything was good with him. So Nancy starts keeping a journal of all the fucked up stuff that is happening to Maurice. And she keeps it under the bed on her side. Every single time something happens, she writes down. Maurice, he didn't like that she was keeping that journal. He thought if they ignored it, it would go away, like herpes. You ignore herpes, it goes away. But
That is not medical advice. We here at the Paranatural Podcast do not give medical advice. Anything we do say that may or may not sound like medical advice is simply parody. Okay, carry on.
Maurice wanted to see it one time because I guess he was interested. And when Nancy pulled it out from under the bed, it was completely burnt underneath her bed. It was to the point where the pages were just turned into ash and falling out.
That's not how that's supposed to work.
I know. She blamed Maurice at first, but then she could see it in his eyes when he was saying he didn't do it, that he had nothing to do with it. After this, Nancy suggested they talk to a priest, and Maurice seemed very relieved that she brought that up. After breakfast, they went and saw Father Beardsley. They told the old priest that they thought they were cursed by Nancy's mother because they technically weren't married right now. And yeah, her mom's was old fashioned, so like she thought mom was pissed off about them living together, undoing the naughties. So Father Beardsley is like, if that's what you think it is, I'll marry you guys right now. So they plan it out, and like 2 days later, they got married. They thought everything was going to be good. And, well, a month after that, there was this great big lightning and windstorm knocked down this great big ash tree in his yard, in Maurice's yard. And Maurice was very, very experienced with a chainsaw, but he just kept having a bad feeling. But shit has to get done. So he's cutting it up. Suddenly, the handle is pulled from his hand and it cut right into his work boot. Blood just started spraying out. And Maurice didn't feel any pain, but he was like, fuck. And then he started saying over and over like a mantra. He was like, there is no cut. I am not cut. There is no cut. So he walks up to the porch, sits down, takes off his boot, and it is cut clean through. Takes off his boot, his sock is just drenched in blood with a big hole in it. Then he takes off his sock. All that's there is blood. There is no cuts. There is nothing.
That's not generally how healing works.
I know.
Well, he is French Canadian, so he might be related to Wolverine.
Oh, jeez. And the Canadian part, he could be related to Deadpool.
Yeah. Ryan
Reynolds is Canadian.
He is Canadian.
Not his fault, though. So shortly after this strange occurrence, a mysterious fire broke out at Maurice's house. Complete loss as the fire took his shed. Just burn it to the ground. Not even a week after that, another fire took place and it burnt down his vegetable stand that he kept out in front of his house to sell to like tourists and stuff. And then a few days after that, another fire took place inside Maurice's house and his stepdaughter's bedroom. Just spontaneous. All three had no cause, no reason. They just happened spontaneously. Then at night, they were hearing all sorts of weird noises like knocking, footsteps, groaning, mumbling, tapping, and like on top of all that, they were smelling this like putrid smell. all the strange things that were, it was just scary at this point. Nobody was getting hurt. Even with the chainsaw thing, Maurice wasn't hurt. It's scaring the shit out of him. And like everyone, hopefully, if they're into this podcast, has seen the Conjuring movies, or at least know of Ed and Lorraine Warren. And they say like how many ever steps to in possession. The first one is like it's coming in and scaring the fuck out of you. So it makes a little bit of sense. Okay, so it was scaring everyone at this point, but that would change very soon. Around Christmas 1984 is when shit hit the fan. The family thought that Maurice needed a distraction from all the weird shit going on. So they decided they're gonna decorate the farmhouse like to the nines, like just like Vegas Strip kind of decorations. So Maurice built this great big like 10-foot wooden cross that he was gonna hang up on his roof, along with a lot of lights. So he carries the cross up there, and then like he's on a 2-story ladder, like 20-foot ladder. He gets the cross up there, he comes back down, grabs the lights, starts climbing up, and the ladder just like starts shaking really violently and quote bucking like a wild steed, unquote. Maurice fell and landed on his shoulder. So he climbs up the ladder again, and once he gets close to the top, the ladder just flips backwards and he fell on his head.
Wow.
Lights go out for a second, come back on. He's hurt and he's pissed. So he climbs again. And
Maurice, buddy, you got to learn when to quit, pal.
well, so he gets to the top and he starts lifting his leg up to climb onto the roof, and it falls back again. It like slides away from the house and then falls back. When he's falling, the lights end up around his throat, and just like he feels this outside force just pulling on him, choking the shit out of him.
Choke me, Devil Daddy, choke me.
That's what he was saying. So he decides to like yell at whatever was pulling them and making them tighter, and they loosened. So he climbs up the ladder again. I'm kidding. He gave up on the decorations.
I thought you were serious. I'm like, Jesus, fuck, this guy don't know when to stop.
He doesn't, and we will get into that even more.
Holy Jesus, Maurice, stay your ass on the ground, bud.
So Christmas happens, New Year's happens, and like New Year's Day, Maurice decided that 1985 was gonna be the year that everything turned around. Everything was just gonna go back to a nice life. They just had to ignore the shitty stuff and have a positive attitude. That's exactly how all these things work, right?
Well, I mean, especially in 1985.
That's right. Music was best then.
I was born then.
All right. So it was that wasn't going to be the year. So they ended up talking to Father Beardsley again after Maurice got thrown down some church stairs by an invisible force. Like they decided to go to mass to start off the new year. And as he's walking up the steps, he just gets lifted into the air and thrown back.
I'm starting to wonder if Maurice just wasn't real clumsy.
So there's actually pictures of this shit of him like getting launched into the air.
Who was taking pictures of Maurice walking up the church steps?
Not the church steps, different instances. So other than like him ripping his pants, his Sunday pants, and cut on his knee, nothing happened. Like he walked up there just cussing at whatever, threw him down. He was pissed.
Fucking gravity.
Yeah, basically. Fuck you, Isaac Newton. You shouldn't have invented that. So Nancy talks to Father Beardsley and she tells him everything that's going on. Took like 4 hours. And Father Beardsley is listening to it. And he decided that the house was what was haunted. So he went over and blessed their house first thing, like as soon as they got done talking. He didn't think it would like cure everything, but he thought it would help. And Nancy said she knew that that was going to be the trick. A week later, Father Beardsley receives a frantic call from Nancy saying things are even worse now. The incident that caused her to call was another doppelganger incident. Nancy, her sister, and her sister's husband were in the kitchen when Maurice walks out butt-ass naked, like through the hallway and walks right by him out of the house.
Hey, say anything you like, speak up.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Nancy knew he wouldn't be a little jaybird, so she
Grower not a shower, huh?
Yeah. Well, so she goes and checks in their bedroom, and there Maurice is, dressed, sitting on his bed, putting his boots on. Like within a minute this happened. When she saw him on the bed, his eyes were gushing blood. So Father Beardsley decided he'd heard of Ed and Lorraine Warren. So he decides he wants to see if they can help him because obviously he's not doing a good enough job. He hoped that the people he saw in a lecture on the television could help a lot better than him. So he didn't think he could help any more than what he already had. So after a few attempts to call the Warrens, he finally gets through to them. They immediately show concern and they're hoping that they can help Maurice. So while waiting for the Warrens to call the Father Beardsley, he receives another call from Nancy saying Maurice is speaking Latin. She didn't know exactly what language it was, but she like started repeating some of the things he was saying, and Father Beardsley is like, sure shit, that's Latin. Not good. So after hearing about like what Father Beardsley says, the Warrens drive out to Massachusetts with an officer they've worked with a few times in the past. This visit was to gauge just how true Maurice's accounts were and if they thought it was genuine or if he was a big fat faker.
Mhm.
While there, Nancy brought up Maurice's mother, which I guess was still a sore subject, and Maurice started to cry.
I mean, duh.
But when he did cry, it was blood, not tears. So Ed takes pictures. And this happened several times over the visit. And Ed thought it was a very good indication of demonic possession. They wanted to have a full investigation of Maurice Theriault. So a group of very trusted people were called upon for the investigation. The Warrens also talked to Father Beardsley. Father Beardsley about assisting. He was more than willing to help, but he was very terrified. Like he'd heard of demonic possession, and he's heard that priests die trying to perform exorcisms, which is very true. I've looked up quite a few where the priest dies. Deputy Seabird, if we remember that dickhead from the very first part,
Yes, indeed.
was still shaken from his last call to the Theriault farm where he saw Maurice covered in blood and spinning like a fucking top. He also heard about psychics helping Maurice with his issue. Maurice had gone to the police department and turned in all of his guns because Ed and Lorraine were like, yeah, and Ed and Lorraine were like, turn in your guns to the police station once you're better, get them back, but you don't want them. So he did, and he said, yeah, these psychics and demonologists are helping me with my problem. Seabird was very skeptical. He thought that Maurice was just trying to cover up for the arson. Remember the 3 fires that spontaneously happened back to back to back?
Yeah. Did he make like insurance claims on those fires?
Only the one in the house.
I mean, I guess it's a theory, but
well, Seabird's a dick.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a thin theory to me.
Seabird, like, during this part, you're gonna see that he just wants to bring Maurice down, no matter what he sees. So he wants to have a talk with these so-called psychics, and so one morning when Ed shows up to the Theriault farm, Seabird is like stalking, so he goes up there and he starts calling to Ed. He's like, hey, I want to talk to you. And Ed's just kind of ignoring him. And then he starts yelling louder. So Ed turns around and he could tell that Seabird and himself, they weren't going to get along. He suggested that Seabird sees everything firsthand, not like, because he was asking Ed what was going on, and he was like, why don't you come in and see? So Seabird, he wanted to get Maurice with arson, and he saw like the regular, like him crying blood or like having blood dripping from his face. He saw that and he was like, oh, that's just a parlor trick. It's a weird parlor trick. The bishop had agreed to have a church psychiatrist come and dub whether or not Maurice was crazy or if he had emotional trauma, so on and so forth.
That is a decision I agree with.
This guy was a dick. The church sent a psychiatrist, like a church psychiatrist that didn't believe in God.
So I'm almost with that because you don't want him to be overly religious because that could cause him to misdiagnose.
Right. But if you're sending in a skeptic who deals with this kind of stuff and has never been convinced, it's going to take nothing short of him like floating through the air and like all that crazy stuff to convince him.
Fair point.
So Maurice had a nickname for him. He called him the Head Cracker. Once they saw who the psychiatrist was, Ed had heard about him, and he knew the psychiatrist would be nearly impossible to convince, and that it wasn't all in Maurice's head. So they met the psychiatrist at the church, and he immediately talked to Maurice alone. After like 20-25 minutes, he calls Ed in. And he said what was troubling Maurice was not a demon or possession. He was a sexual deviant.
Excuse me?
Yeah. I'm assuming he told him about like his dad making him fuck a goat.
I mean, yes, but
That's what he said.
yeah, that's guy. Okay, I'm with you now.
And
Guy was a dick. The head cracker is a dick.
so Ed he shows him the pictures of like Maurice crying blood, Maurice levitating, that kind of stuff. He says it's all staged and he's just a sexual deviant. So Ed loses his shit. He gets pissed and he wants to say something, but he just storms right out. He grabs Maurice by the arm, pulls him out, everyone follows suit. And so they start driving down the church driveway, and while they're leaving, Maurice starts crying out in pain. He said his back was burning. Ed pulls the car over, runs over to the side, and they lift up his shirt. And there, like the entirety of his back, it looked like a gigantic cross was burned into his skin. So Ed's like, okay, that motherfucker wants proof. We'll give him proof. So they pull Maurice in there, and it's still there. The head cracker
The head
sees
cracker.
it. Yep. Head cracker sees it, and he's like, Maurice, how did you do this to yourself? I don't lie to you. You don't lie to me. How'd you do it? Ed blew up. Ed told the shrink, I hope when you're alone, something comes and smashes you right in the mouth. It happens to this man that you refuse to help, and I hope it happens to you. Ed's supposed to be a man of God. It's going to take a lot for him to say that. So, with that, they left again. Father Beardsley was the only one left with the head cracker. And he says, I think you are a very, very nasty man. And he leaves his own church to get away from him and get some fresh air and calm down. With that meeting, somehow someone spread the story of Maurice. And shit blows up. Newspapers, every local newspaper is covering that story. There is not a time of day where they're not getting bothered by hateful neighbors, people wanting to see the devil just parking in his lawn and just taking pictures, that kind of stuff. So the newspapers never used his name, even though they knew exactly who it was, but they would like say the poor farmer on this street, so on and so forth.
I mean, I guess
And-
that's kind of nice of him. But if you leave enough clues in your papers, you might as well just say the bro's name.
Right. So Maurice, though he had many people come up and ask him for his side of the story and all that, he never commented, which led to more even wild theories. Seabird, the deputy, he also was getting harassed, and he said he did see a cross carved into Maurice's back. Maurice couldn't get any peace anywhere. People constantly parked at his house saying that he was a devil worshiper. Reporters would show up when he would go to church and just like shudder the shit out of it. Beardsley ended up like scolding them in the middle of mass, stopped what he was doing, and just bitched him out and kicked him out of the church. Maurice, he'd become nothing more than a recluse. He would not leave his house. So Seabird shows up at Maurice's house saying he needed to stop the nonsense so people would leave everyone alone in the town. Maurice was like, dude, this shit's happening. All I want is help. So how about you stay the night and you will see firsthand that all this shit is real. Seabird accepts it, and they agree on the very next night. So when Seabird shows up, Maurice opened the door and he looked funny. His face was like almost scaly. he didn't have his normal Maurice voice. And Seabird's like, hey, you said I could spend the night here and see what was going on. Maurice is like, no, you can't stay here. And he acted like they never even talked about it. So as Seabird's leaving, he turns and he just sees Maurice, like, not Maurice, but Maurice, staring out the window with this great big smile and like blood oozing from his mouth. And so Nancy gets home, finds Maurice passed out right by the window. Nancy wakes him up and asks what he's doing. He told her that he was just waiting for Seabird to show up because he was supposed to spend the night. Nancy was very okay that he didn't show up because she hated Seabird. She thought he was just out to get him, which totally true. There's a time that a family friend heard about what was going on and he visited him. He lived in Canada. It was a special. He brought a gift from Canada, and it was like this special vial of holy water.
Oh, I thought it would be syrup.
No, it would have been a good gift.
That probably would have got rid of the demon.
Probably. Or some strong whiskey. So he offered it to Maurice, and Maurice hasn't even greeted him at this point. He's just sitting at the table, not talking, not acknowledging anything. So Nancy takes it and she's like, Here, Maurice. He got this for you. Isn't that nice? And he's like, I don't want it. She's like, he brought it a long way just for you. You're going to take it. And he was like, no, I don't want it now. So Nancy's like, well, fine. If you don't want it, I'm going to sprinkle some on you. So she dripped some on his forehead, and as the holy water dripped down his face, it turned blood red. Maurice's body turned like stiff as a board, and blood started flowing from his mouth. The way they describe it in the book, he rose like a zombie, like rigor mortis kind of zombie, as you remember in my zombie episode. And he walks into the bathroom. A few minutes later, Maurice emerges from the bathroom and greets his friend like he just realized he was there. He's like, oh, it's been so long since I saw you. When did you get here? Friend is freaked. He's like, what the fuck? Nancy's like, yeah, it happens. So Maurice's friend was very quick to leave. And after a few months, 2 days after Easter, the Therials received a call from Father Beardsley asking them to meet him at the church. When they got there, they were met by Ed and Lorraine, Father Beardsley, and another priest. His name was Bishop Timothy Harrington. And hope kind of began to spread when they saw two priests.
Mm-hmm.
So the bishop, he did small talk with Maurice and everyone for a second. But then he's like, okay, I'm going to say some prayers over you. And he does this half-ass exorcism.
We know how that turns out.
Yeah. Maurice's face, like once he starts saying like little rites, Maurice's face changes. It like contorts into this weird, scaly. Yeah, it's weird. So his brow began to swell to the point where it was hanging over his eyes. His eyes, like all the color drained from him, and he like took on this sadistic gleam, they said. And a voice that was not Maurice's, he said, I am in the depths of this man's soul, and I will have his soul.
Well.
Yeah. The bishop continued to pray, and Maurice kind of like lurched forward at him, and the bishop liberally poured holy water on him, doused him in holy water, and he passed out. When Maurice came to, he was soaking wet, and I love this part of the book. Fucking love it. He came to, and he looks down because he's drenched, and he's like, "Did I piss myself?" And everyone's like, "No." And he's like, asked the bishop, he's like, "Can I have a cigarette?" The bishop joins Maurice for a smoke.
The good old days.
Yep. And he told Maurice that he will continue to help him. And knew this wasn't the end of it. So the prayers it slowed the incidences down for 3 days. The investigation continued into late March 1985. Late one night, Lorraine receives a phone call from one of the investigators stating objects were flying around the house. The Warrens showed up well before daylight. Like within 3 hours of that call, they showed up. They live 2.5 hours away. So sadly, all they could do was like try to calm them down. Like, shit happens, guys. Sorry. Nancy started getting more and more frightened of certain occurrences. Like one time she was working outside and it's March, so like the snow is starting to go away. But she hears just this banging in the greenhouse. And so she thinks it's Frenchie. She goes in there, there's nothing in there. She leaves and she just hears banging like someone hitting shit with a hammer. So she goes back in there, nothing. 2 seconds later, Maurice's truck pulls up. She's like, where were you? And he's like, "Oh, I was just fixing the vegetable stand." And she tells him what happened. Maurice gets pissed. He's getting sick of this thing scaring his lady. So he goes in there and he's like, "All right, bitch. If you want me, come and get me." Instantly, a 2x4 flies across the greenhouse, smokes him right in the dome. Cuts his head wide open.
That probably shouldn't be funny, but it kind of is.
Well, he's like, "Bring it on, bitch." And they brought it on.
Yep, they brought it on. They called your bluff, Maurice. Fucking
yeah. So he had a pretty big cut and a huge bump, but otherwise he was okay. One day, Ed just had this. He felt like he needed to go see Maurice, so he drives the 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and he gets there. Maurice is sitting in his truck crying. So he's like, "Hey, dude, what's going on?" Maurice is like, "Last night, I had a thought of killing myself. And I would have, but I chickened out last night. And I was about to go do it right now. But you pulled up." Next to him, he had a pre-tied noose. He was going to hang himself. Ed is like, "I know things are tough right now, but we will help you. You just got to stick it out." So, while waiting for further help from the church, things got a lot worse. Maurice had more possession-like instances. Like his face would contort all the time. He would like bend over backwards, the 90-degree style, and like twist around and shit. He would speak different languages, and he had profuse bleeding. One time, a college kid, one of the helpers, is like, "Hey, what would happen if you drank holy water?" Maurice like looks over at him like, yeah, get it out of your system. So Maurice like looks over at him, pissed off for a second, but then just cracks a weird smile. And he's like, "Well, let's find out."
Leave
So he
it
takes
to
a
a
drink.
college kid to think that the solution to any problem is drinking.
Yeah, Kappa Beta, whatever. So Maurice drank the holy water. Instantly, his body just gets all stiff, and blood starts pouring out of his mouth. His hands start like contorting and his digits are bending backwards. When he came to, he didn't remember even thinking about drinking holy water. But they took pictures of it. And those pictures you can find online. I don't like a lot of the stuff is bloody, so I don't know if I want to post it on the
Yeah,
Facebook.
that's fair. We can let people look it up for themselves.
And there's also the exorcism online, also bloody. So Maurice had finally had enough and thought that if he visited his father's grave and forgave him, it would all end. Because he was like, okay, maybe my father is cursing me. So he goes there. Nancy's waiting in the truck. He gets out, walks up to his dad's grave, and this pisses me off to no end. His mother and father are buried together.
Mm.
He killed her.
Yeah.
Throw that dude in a river somewhere.
Fair.
Let her have
At least
more
eternal
room.
peace.
Yeah, let her like have some rolling around room down there.
Yeah, it's fair.
So he goes and prays over his father's grave, and he says, I want to be a son to you, and I want you to be a father to me. Next, Nancy saw Maurice get launched. Like, just fly back. Maurice is like, okay, let's get the fuck out of here. So they left immediately, and when they got home, something even worse happened. Nancy got out of the car, starts walking up through the it's almost like a hallway, but like an awning type situation. There's
Like a
walls
breezeway.
yeah,
Mhm.
but a tall one.
Mhm.
So Nancy's walking in front of him, and then she starts hearing him just curse. Like he just starts spouting out all sorts of bad words. She turns around. Maurice is upside down in the air, getting bashed against the wall over and over again. And all he's doing is cussing his lungs out. So what any good wife would do, Ed had her carry a camera in case weird things happen.
Mm.
She just starts taking pictures.
I mean, honestly, what the fuck else is she supposed to do?
Well, after
Like-
that, she starts praying, and Maurice is having his colorful language like, leave me the fuck alone, you motherfucker, blah, 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 blah. And it drops him. The bishop continued to send people to like pray over Maurice,
Mm.
but they couldn't tell if people were coming from the bishop or like just to get a scoop of the story, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So this one time, these two guys showed up and they're like, hey, we just had a feeling we needed to pray over you. And Nancy's like, no, get out of here. And Maurice, he's just standing back. The second guy gets out of the car and just starts taking pictures of Maurice.
Mm.
And it's a Polaroid, so it prints it out automatically. Maurice scares the shit out of this guy. Just starts screaming all sorts of crazy shit. Rips the camera and the picture out of his hand. And they take off running. They drive like bad out of hell. So they look, or Nancy looks at the picture that was taken and got printed out. And she freaks out. She's like, look at this. And Maurice is kind of a jokey kind of guy. So he's like, I look good, huh? Scaring people. And then she's like, look at your feet. So he looks down, and surrounding him was fire. Like clear as day fire. Certain people would come and say, we're from the bishop and we need to pray over you. So he'd let it happen, and instantly when they would start praying, he would just start leaking blood. Like whether it's from his hands, feet, face,
Mm.
all sorts of stuff out of. And they would all leave very quickly. They would be like, well, we did our job. Good luck. So Maurice began to think of chasing people off as like a game.
Mm-hmm.
He started having a lot of fun with it. But in early spring, there was about a 2-day period where nothing happened and like people started getting optimistic. They're like, okay, cool. He's cured. We waited it out like herpes. And Ed, he's like, this ain't the end of it. Trust me. And just a couple hours after his call, something happened. The third day that nothing was happening, Maurice is teaching one of the college kid helper investigator guys how to like tend the plants in the greenhouse. But then things changed very suddenly. He teaches this kid how to do this stuff, like tend to the plants, clip them, you know, your little bonsai tree
Mhm.
from Karate Kid.
Mhm.
Kind of like that. He's Master Shifu in this situation.
That's the wrong movie. Anyway.
So the young investigator, he turned his back to Maurice while he's tending to some plants, and then he heard a strange voice say, "You put fucking ice cubes down my back." The investigator turns around and he sees a very different Maurice. Maurice, his face was like pulled and stretched, and he was like soaked in blood. So he's like, Maurice, you there, buddy? But Maurice just he's paused. Like someone pushed the pause button.
Hmm.
So, like, rigor mortis Maurice gets carried in by this college kid. And Nancy is like, why is the back of his shirt all bloody?
Mhm.
So they lift it up, and there's not a scratch on him. The blood is literally dripping off of his shirt, but there's no scratch on him. So Ed shows up the next day with news that he was ready and trying to find the right exorcist. Two problems with the church were it was very slow to approve an exorcism, and there weren't many priests trained or prepared for a fight with Satan.
Mhm.
Ed informed quite a few priests of what was going on with Maurice, but the priest he had in mind was Bishop Robert McKenna. McKenna was excommunicated. He in the early 80s or 70s, late 70s, early 80s, the bishop like banned doing mass in Latin.
Mhm.
McKenna's like, it's been working this long so far. I'm not changing. Like, I'm doing it in Latin. So they excommunicated him for it. He many saw McKenna as very controversial, and he held to the old ways of the church. So Bishop Harrington, the first guy to try to do that botched exorcism on Maurice, told the Warrens that McKenna is not the right guy for the job and he will not support that. This small disagreement put Maurice's case in limbo. Maurice, he couldn't wait much longer for help from the church. Shit was hitting the fan. So about 2 weeks after they attempted the exorcism, they finally found someone they agreed on, Father Neil Delaney. Though he was more of a faith healer than an exorcist, they knew the great things he had done through the power of prayer. He was friends with Bishop Harrington and the Warrens, so they believed he'd at least be able to help Maurice a little bit. While waiting for the exorcism, Maurice began feeling testy and depressed. Nancy tried to cheer him up by teaching One of Maurice's favorite things is praying. Like, prayer made him feel safe.
Odd hobby for a demon.
Yeah. So Nancy's like, I'm gonna teach you the Hail Mary prayer in English because his first language is French. So she's teaching him right before bed, and they start saying it. A few lines in, Nancy feels a strong iron grip hand around her throat. She turns the lights on, like struggling to find the little switch, or not switch, but the little pull thing for lamps. I don't know what that's called, but so she pulls that, turns the light on, and she just sees Maurice with this malicious grin and both hands on his lap while she's being choked. Just before she blacks out, the grip loosens, and she went and looked in the bathroom mirror and saw like this big hand-shaped welt that was bruising already.
Mhm.
And she turns back and sees Maurice is sound asleep. So she's like, we need the exorcism now. Bishop Delaney said a few rites for Maurice instead of performing a full exorcism. During this, Maurice stayed aware and conscious, and nothing had changed as far as his torment. Like, this guy did an even more half-assed exorcism. It seemed to be even less useful than Father Harrington's prayers for Maurice. So Ed and Lorraine agreed, we need a real exorcist, someone who has done this shit before. So once again, they ask Bishop McKenna to perform the exorcism. McKenna had already been praying for Maurice for quite some time, like ever since day one when he heard about him. He started praying for Maurice. McKenna, he's a very, very slender 58-year-old man. He stood 5'8" and he weighed 110 pounds.
Oof,
Just a little fella.
that's not enough pounds, bud.
Yeah. Well, so he would fast several times a week, and he fasted for like 4 days before Maurice's exorcism. And like, though that is supposed to make you feel weak, apparently it's supposed to make you spiritually strong. He had an even stronger will than that, though. Like, he'd never given up on anything. Thing is, he had exorcised evil spirits out of houses, but never out of a person. So he had a slight nervousness, but he was more eager to help the poor, tormented farmer. McKenna brought with him a brass cross, holy water, a book of rites, a Bible, and his priest habit. They all met at the Theriault farm for the exorcism, and they set up everything in the living room and called Maurice in. Altogether, to restrain Maurice, there was 7 people.
That's quite a few.
That is. McKenna. Okay, so there was a bunch of college kids. There was 2 cops. There was McKenna, Ed, and Lorraine, and then Nancy and Maurice. So McKenna had started saying prayers, and instantly Maurice's eyes began to pour blood. McKenna continued as Maurice began to thrash out. Banging sounds erupted and ended as soon as they began. They were replaced with what sounded like hundreds of whispers from hundreds of people. The whispers rattled everyone aside from the old bishop. The exorcism rites began after the preliminary prayers. After it was time to call to the demon, so McKenna demanded its name, and the banging once again erupted. Blood was now flowing freely from Maurice's nose. Crosses had appeared to be burnt in Maurice's hands. The old bishop, who was prepared for just about anything, was starting to shake. Two of the assistants, under Ed's orders, because the bishop is right across from Maurice.
Mm.
Maurice is wearing cowboy boots, so Ed's like, hey, take those off before he kicks him.
Yeah, no shit.
So they whip off the cowboy boots, and they were shocked to see that his socks were now drenched in blood. They started taking the socks off, and he had more stigmata. There was holes in his feet. Though everyone now was shaken, Ed seemed to be extremely pale. Lorraine asked him if he was all right. Ed said he was fine, but he felt extremely nauseous. He didn't want to leave Maurice even for a second. Maurice's eyes bulged, and only the whites were visible. The chair started shaking and rocking. McKenna continued the rites, and Maurice's face had began to change to a swollen reptilian monster. The creature began to stand up, and Ed tried to stop him. And what used to be Maurice just reached out and kind of like gave him a little push. But it was a little bit more than a little push. Ed said it felt like 100 tons were crushing his chest. So he's just laying on the ground, and then everyone else comes over and holds Maurice down. McKenna demanded its name again, and once again, demanded its name, and it replied, "I am what I am," and it started laughing. McKenna repeated this request 3 more times and was met with the exact same answer. So Bishop McKenna asked, "How many of you are there?" And it said, "I am the only one," the ugly fuckface said. One more time, he demanded its name, and it said, I'm going to speak Latin here. Dices supra Chilios.
Oh.
The bishop recognized this as Latin, roughly translated to you say I am proud. Maurice then went back into a trance. McKenna continued, and he was trying to cast out the evil dick face. He then poured holy water on him and forcibly pressed a crucifix against his head. His face slowly began to change back. He woke up and slowly stood, and he starts crying real tears, not blood, as he embraced his wife. Now, I would have loved for it to end there. I would have.
Yeah.
But sadly, it doesn't.
Dex.
Oh, I know. And I'm going to take this second to hydrate. So, fair warning, this is where shit hits the fan even more.
Mm-hmm.
I got the sneezes. So, Ed, he wasn't feeling right after all that. And he had more and more chest pain. Turned out he had a massive heart attack. The doctor told him when he, apparently doctors can tell you when it happened, like when it first started happening.
Mm-hmm.
It was shortly after the exorcism had taken place or began. So after 7 days in the hospital, Ed gets released. He had a very long road to recovery, and he and Lorraine decided that if he makes a full recovery, they will continue to do their work. Spoiler alert, Ed was fine. And after 6 months, he wanted to check in on Maurice. They found out some very shocking, upsetting news. 2 months after the exorcism, Seabird found much worse things about Maurice than arson. Maurice's stepdaughter, who was 13, came forward saying that when Maurice was possessed, he or it would engage in sexual intercourse with her. Maurice took a polygraph test, and the results were inconclusive. Seabird tried to send the case to the grand jury, but nobody wanted to touch that with how much publicity was around Maurice. So Seabird has this talk with his wife, and she's like, bring this scumbag down. Like, if ain't no one gonna help you, fucking do it. So Maurice was arrested in early July by Seabird, who was ready to fight the court himself. Seabird brought up the charges to Maurice, and Maurice had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. He's like, I have never touched that girl. I love her like my own daughter. So Seabird wasn't getting talked out of it. He starts writing up the arrest papers and all that, and he shit on a typewriter, apparently. So he looks up after filling them out, and he gasps. Maurice's face had contorted and was pouring blood. The thing that was wearing Maurice's skin laughed and said, you and I will be together for a long, long time. Seabird was gifted holy water by that priest. I can't remember his name right now. The first priest that tried to help him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got nothing.
Beardsley, sorry.
There you go.
Father Beardsley. Yeah, he was gifted it when Father Beardsley found out that he was supposed to be staying a night at Maurice's house. He gave him a vial of holy water. So he sees this shit, and he pours the holy water on Maurice. Maurice begins to scream and like thrash out in pain, and starts changing back. But before he changes back, Seabird's like, oh, I'm going to pull this clever little shit. Be like, that wasn't actually holy water. Ha ha ha. You're faking. But Maurice is still thrashing around in pain. So he's like, oh, maybe it's real. And that's where the book ends. But we're not done. Jakey did some research.
Attaboy.
Yep. So, yeah, the book ending pissed me off. Monumentally. Who ends a book like that?
The Warrens.
You would think they would want, like, oh, yes, exorcism works. Oh, actually, it says in the book that sometimes you have symptoms like possession after it's exorcised. So they're saying that's completely normal.
I don't think that's how this works.
That's not exactly how that works.
If you
no.
still got symptoms, you still got demons.
Got Gottliebinditis.
Yep.
So this is Maurice's fate. Or his... I looked up his obituary. He was born July 13th, 1936. He died November 3rd, 1992. November 3rd, gunshots were heard, and Nancy Theriault ran out into the street with a bullet wound on her side and in her arm. She ran across the street to the neighbor's house in Whately, Massachusetts, where they were renting a house because after Maurice got arrested, they lost their farm.
Mm.
Maurice was seen following her into the streets, but suddenly stopped in the middle of the street, turned the gun on himself, and shot himself. Maurice Frenchy Theriault was found dead by gunshot wound to the head. Nancy was taken to Bay State Medical Center in Springfield, where she made a full recovery. The end. Oh, the stunts performed in this story were performed by professionals, and you should not try to conjure your own demon to fuck up your entire life. This has been a paranatural message.
Yes. Well, at least fucking Nancy made it out. God damn.
Yeah, so I read that she had filed for divorce
Mm.
and got a restraining order against him. And that happens. Like, that's all I could find. I am disappointed.
Well, like father, like
Trying
son,
to-
I guess.
No shit.
It's a pretty sad fucking story, really.
It is. I'm really glad it's over.
Yeah, it's been a ride, buddy. It's been a ride.
Yeah. So we're gonna go back to funny shit after this. All right. Now I can ask for your thoughts.
All right. I'm very skeptical of this entire fucking story.
The entire story?
The entire story.
Why?
The Warrens. Simply put, the fucking Warrens. They have been found to have made up so much shit in their lives
Uh-huh.
that it's pretty much anything they touch, I can't trust.
So you just don't like the Warrens, like all the made up shit, and you just are
How
skeptical.
do you believe any of it? Like, all of the supernatural shit they could have made up, and Maurice Theriault could have just been a very mentally disturbed man.
So the fact that him, Nancy, the priest, and the Warrens wrote this book, like all of them got together and wrote this book.
I would only be able to trust it if I knew exactly which chapters, which words, which sentences were written by whom.
I left out the stuff that sounded heavily Warren, just so you know.
They're good at what they do.
They are.
I'll give them credit for that. Amityville was fucking believable. It was all bullshit.
Yeah. Yep.
The Conjuring book that they did was so full of shit that the family felt it necessary to write another one.
So I had a theory on why this one wasn't made into a movie. It's just showing that exorcism usually fails. Like they said, or somewhere online, it said 95% of the time, a first exorcism does not work. They have to continuously
They
do this
over
for
and
years.
over and over and over again.
And the Conjuring movies, it shows like a one and done thing.
Yeah.
I hate that shit. Other movies like The Rite with Anthony Hopkins, which is based on a true story, shows him go to the same people over and over and over and over, and shows that hosts of demonic possession are dying. I think the reason I believe this is just because of how fucking tragic this story is.
Which I understand. And yet we see that same kind of tragedy with people who are just severely mentally ill and do not seek the proper treatments.
Did you watch The Exorcism?
No,
Thought you said you were going to watch it.
I forgot.
Okay. So there's pictures of him like literally flying through the air.
Mm.
There's pictures of him like with a different face. pictures of him leaking blood.
Are these still photos?
Yeah.
Then I can't believe it.
All right, and then there's the video of the exorcism.
The video I would have to watch before I made a determination. But photos are easily faked.
Well, you watch the exorcism and let me know if you're super skeptical.
All right, I will. But until then, the Warrens. Anyway.
All right. Aside from that, what do you think of the story?
It's a good story. Sad, tragic story.
Very.
Which, obviously, like you said, you looked up the guy's obituary.
Yep.
You looked up the newspaper article about his mom and dad.
Yep.
So we know that's true. And the Warrens, I think a lot of the reason why they're so believable, they take real shit and just embellish and add and make it bigger than it was. So they probably, in my opinion, may have done something similar to this story.
Yeah. I don't know. I want to try to do a little bit more research, but I also want to be fucking done with Satan's Harvest.
Well, I don't see a problem with that, so
yeah. I'm a comedy kind of person. This shit, it ain't doing it for me. I didn't get to be hardly funny at all.
Yeah, it's a really good story, but we know it was tragic no matter what the truth behind it is. Which, when you talk about things like we talk about, sometimes that just be the way it be.
Yeah. So, like, one of the big reasons why I wanted to do this story is, like, 99% of the stories you're seeing on TV or, like, you're reading about, they all have happy endings. Like, when it comes to, like, possession type stuff.
Or most of anything, really.
Yeah. That doesn't happen. Like, sometimes, yeah, but it's not happy endings. This ain't a fairy tale. This is life. Bad shit happens. Exorcisms, they don't work the first go around. Sometimes they don't work at all.
Yeah, that's real.
And, like, the priests who die trying to perform an exorcism, that's real. Like, yeah, so it's just it's a story different from what we've covered.
And and now that you've said that,
I have said that.
Like, I get it. And this was a really good way to stop for a moment and after a year remind ourselves that the people that we talk about in these stories are very real people.
Yeah.
We can't vouch for the story, but the people are very real people.
Yeah.
So.
Like, Maurice Theriault, you can Google him and, like, his entire life story will pop up in his words, like his autobiography. And it is quite similar, like, from the beginning, my first part of his childhood and stuff. That is very similar. Including the shit that he said, like the sacrilegious statements and whatnot. Thing that he refuses to say what he did in that barn. And, like, a lot of people, one of the co-writers of this book, I can't remember his name, but he said, when interviewed about his death, he was like, I believe that he believed he was possessed. I don't believe he was possessed.
You know what? Yeah, okay.
And that's one of the writers of this book.
Yeah, I mean, That can be a thing as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Placebo effect goes a 180. Like you can placebo yourself into bad shit. If
Yep.
you believe that you're sick, hypochondriacs always think they're getting sick.
Yep.
It's the same thing. Bad shit can happen if you are too open-minded about ailments.
Yeah, that's real. That's very real.
But yeah, that's my part. I want to be done with Satan's Harvest.
Well, then, let's be done with it. It's been a great story. It's been a wonderful ride. And next week, ladies and gentlemen, we get back to the fun stuff. If you enjoy our show, please don't forget to tell a friend. Bring them on. All that good stuff. Till then, thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Good night.
Sorry about the depressing shit. Life happens. Love you guys. Please keep listening. Good night. Penis.
I might leave that penis in.
This is a good penis.